So Kerri, why are you running for school committee?
I'm not running for school committee. I have no interest in running for school committee. I'm up to here with school as it is. My name is Kerri Lorigan. I teach 7th grade ancient history in the Watertown Public Schools, and I've been teaching for 25 or so years there. And this is my husband Greg Nadeau, and he's running for school committee here in Somerville where we live. And we're here to chat about assessment. It's a little bit like many of our conversations that we have, either over coffee or over dinner, which are often about school and how school could be better and better and better for kids.
So, what letter grade would you give me?
I'm not going to give you a letter grade. I'm not really a fan of letter grades.
Yeah, why not? Let's talk about letter grades.
I don't know. So what's the purpose of a grade, right? The grade is to communicate learning to students and their families, right? But what they actually do, what they actually are instead, is they're averages across all sorts of different assessment types, whether it be completion of homework, whether it be quizzes and tests or projects, or oftentimes behavior, such as participation and attendance are included in there. And so it's not really a simple calculation or communication of learning at all. And so I think it's not that helpful for kids, and it's not that helpful for their families. And instead actually causes them a lot of confusion and stress, which is also not our goal.
I think about it like if you were going to the doctor, and then the doctor's like, okay, you get a B for your health. You'd be like, well, what does that mean, right?
Right, exactly.
You're like, I want an A. I want an A.
How do I get an A?
But my finger hurts. What does the B mean?
And then I go home and I tell my parents, and my parents get stressed out about why I don't have an A in my health.
Why don't you have an A in your health? Right.
Yeah, exactly. And what do I need to do to get an A? And so it's all focused around, the points, and what do I need? And it's not about the learning, showing the demonstration of learning.
So how could it be different? Like, let's talk about what would it look like in a classroom if it was different.
There's a lot of teachers, certainly all over the country, who are experimenting right now with how to improve this kind of communication. And I would say I'm one of those teachers. Okay, I don't have it all figured out by any means, and I'm looking for partners to help me figure it out. But part of it is to just try and focus a little bit more on, what it is that we want kids to either know and be able to do, and how we can get them to show those skills or content knowledge in small bites, and then perhaps to apply it in new contexts, and then perhaps to, synthesize it with other skills and knowledge in something bigger and broader. And so it may not be letter grades. I know certainly in elementary school it's no longer letter grades. I don't know if you remember this, when Max was in first grade, they still had letter grades in the elementary schools. And I remember at some point he got an A in English. And, and I thought, what does that mean? Right. I said, the kid doesn't know how to read, or he doesn't know how to write, or whatever it was, whichever the skill was. And I thought, this doesn't make any sense to me. And so, elementary schools have come around to some greater wisdom of trying to communicate.
But the elementary school grades are still, I always found them to be, not good. You get sat or unsat or something like that. And I thought, well, what does that mean about skills?
I don't think satisfactory and unsatisfactory, I don't think that helps. I think it's got to be about some amount of skills, and I think they do that more now in the elementary schools. So they'll have, for instance, in reading, they'll have it broken down into the 4 standards of reading, in English class, or ELA, reading, writing, speech and
Research?
speaking and listening. No, that's sort of a separate one. Speaking and listening, and language. Those are the four standard chunks.
Yep.
And certainly in math, you can see that there are different standard chunks. I mean, you could say, even like in the broadest way, you could say, whatever, algebra, geometry. I'm thinking about middle school.
Yep.
And how those are different chunks of knowledge and content and skills. And so you divide those up, so that way when you're communicating to parents, you might be saying, or a student might be saying in a conference, I did really well in that first unit and did really poorly in that second unit. And when you say, okay, the first unit was a geometry unit and the second was algebra, then that gives you more information about, the student's strengths and challenges, and, how to help them. And it gives parents more information rather than just math, So the issue is, one of the issues, of course, is that when you get to possibly middle school or high school, teachers have just far too many students to be able to get to that level of that gradation of sorts for all of their students.
So, look, we've talked about this for the past 10 years, almost every day or or week,
Yeah.
and you haven't really been able to change your classroom, and even though you've wanted to. So how could I help Somerville teachers make this type of change?
Certainly, first of all, talking with them specifically, I know that there's a lot of work, I'm thinking about the high school, that there's a lot of work that's being done with the Bar Foundation on trying to change the way that the teaching and learning is happening in the classrooms, and trying to create, different sorts of performance-based assessments, I think is probably very helpful. I think showing mastery, trying to figure out how to show mastery in bite-sized components, and communicating that home to students and their parents. And I think there are lots of models out there that make it possible. So one of the things that also has to change is the way that schools, teachers communicate learning out. And so in Somerville, it's not Power School.
X2.
It's X2, right?
Yep.
So all of these, grading programs have a lot of flexibility that aren't always utilized. The modules aren't opened up in the way that they want, and there's a desire to have a whole bunch of consistency, which I get. But there's also ways to open them up a little bit more to be more standards based, and there are lots of high schools that are doing this. And so it's a matter of really looking at the reporting systems, how teachers report out, as a way to then backtrack to figuring out how we can change the teaching and learning in the classroom. Because what I've been trying to do is change the teaching and learning in the classroom, and then I keep hitting a wall from, the grade reporting program, not allowing me to communicate that clearly. I still have to do, some sort of letter grade, and yet there isn't any kind of, mathematical formula or whatever. There's no clear, easy way to do that. So, or at least I don't know what it is.
So parents may not be familiar with this new approach to grading. They may hear this as lowering of standards, that if we're removing grades, if we're changing standardized assessments, that we're no longer having expectations for kids. But that's not my sense at all. My sense is that what we're talking about is how to challenge every kid to demonstrate mastery on specific skills, and where they struggle to demonstrate mastery, then providing them with the support they need in order to achieve that mastery. And if you have a child who is getting, say 80s on their, averaging 80s, and then they miss 2 weeks of school because they've got asthma or a COVID scare or something, and now they're missing a bunch of assignments that they got zeros averaged in, and suddenly their 80 becomes a 60 or lower. That doesn't seem like that's a measure of their learning. That seems like that's a measure of their socioeconomics and their wraparound, environment. And
Absolutely.
so we have this antiquated system. It's been around we just learned since 1823 or something, right?
87.
1887, okay. And we sort of take for granted that letter grades are the way that we communicate about learning. But there could be a new way. Could be a different way. What do you think, how does this connect to MCAS and to standardized testing?
It's a big question. I don't know. For me, the way that I look at MCAS is that it's a data point. It's not one to be stressed out about. It's one to just use for information. There was a lot of debate about whether or not kids should take MCAS last spring because of the pandemic, and kids and parents, it seemed to be kind of stressed about it because they said that they hadn't learned everything that they were supposed to be learning, and that therefore the tests would not show them at their best selves. And my feeling was that it was significantly reduced in time, and that again, it's a data point for schools and teachers to get a sense of where the gaps are for kids because of the pandemic, because of how much time on learning we lost, and because of all the challenges that kids and families were going through, and teachers themselves and schools, and blah blah. And so I don't understand entirely why and how it has become so stressful for so many people, because if it's a 10th grade graduation requirement, then even if kids did poorly on it in 10th grade, they still have the opportunity to
they have 5 more retests.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, that is the thing, which is that in the history of MCAS, there's never been a kid in Somerville who's been denied a diploma because they haven't been able to pass MCAS.
Yeah.
So a lot of the pressures are external. A lot of them come from parents, teachers, and then they come down on kids, and they make kids anxious and tense.
Yeah.
But if you were, it's like a test like blood pressure. If you were to go in and you were to get your blood pressure tested, and sometimes it's not accurate, but it's a piece of data.
Yeah.
It's an important piece of data, and it shouldn't be ignored. It just should be seen as one piece of your overall health, just like MCAS is just one piece of measuring your overall performance as a learner. Well, so if we were to have a group of, if I were to get elected to the school committee, what I would do is I would bring together teachers, students, parents, and we'd have a working group that would talk about how assessment is currently used in the school, and then we would explore different options, and we would then encourage teachers to try different things out, to experiment, and then we would then share what works and what doesn't work, and then we would slowly spread that across the district. Do you think is that the right approach, or?
I think it's a good approach. I think it's challenging logistically, just to get those different parties in the room at the same time. But it certainly could even be done just with teachers and students, because that could be done in a logistically simpler way. But because people are experimenting, and sometimes they don't realize, some teachers are experimenting, and they don't realize who else in the district or even in their own schools are aligned with them in experimentation. And so it would be an opportunity, certainly, to connect people up and to share good ideas and to share some things that make you nervous about trying new approaches. And I think that's really valuable. And I think, of course, the kids would have helpful feedback. Now, it is often true that kids have been so well trained in in compliance activities and completion activities that there are many cases when students who are used to something, they don't want to change their, the way that, particularly if they've been successful, they don't want to change that. They, if they're good test takers, they want to continue to have that opportunity to be good test takers. And having to demonstrate learning in other ways can be unnerving for them and their families. So that needs to be taken into consideration. But I think it could be because students maybe who have not done well traditionally in assessment could then obviously benefit greatly and show and demonstrate their learning in really powerful ways. So I think it's it's an awesome endeavor.
So you were talking to me about what you're planning in your classroom this year, where you were going to have put your assignments into 3 buckets of must do, should do, and
aspire to
do, right? And so you have you first are you're gonna take your lesson and you're going to record a video that expresses the core content, and then you're going to set up your classroom where the students are more self-paced, where they're able to work through the must-dos on their own pace, and then they go to the second category, these can-dos, and they work with other kids to do the more enriching, the should-dos.
Between each of the must-dos, there will be, so the must-dos are really about, the essential core information. Then there will be very quick and bite-sized mastery checks for students to be able to show that they understand this, as opposed to, a lot of teachers, we depend on having we have a class discussion and we get a lot of kids who nod their heads and they volunteer and they express that they understand, but then 2/3 of the class probably is quiet, and they may get it, but they may not get it, maybe going over their heads, or they're just too shy or tired or whatever. And so having these little mastery checks is a way to check in on every single kid. Recording some short videos, they shouldn't really be more than, I think, 5 minutes or so, 6 minutes, gets rid of the lecture, and then allows students to slow down the video, speed it up, rewind it, watch it again, go in deeper. You can also embed different questions in there to make sure that different pieces of it are engaged by the students. And so you do those must-dos, and then the little mastery checks. The should-do activities are more collaborative, and they're one level deeper, or application of some of that essential knowledge. And then if there's some students who are fine to keep going on, and you have the aspire to do activities where those can be those can be independent research activities or what have you. They can be individual, they can be in pairs or whatever. But it's the must-dos that are must-dos and the should-dos that are absolutely essential. And so it's a built-in way to differentiate, because not every kid needs to do every assignment, but some kids can easily do more. And so that's the thinking in that. And the self-pacing is appealing, particularly in elementary or middle school classes, where everybody's developing in at different speeds, and so those work really well.
It's hard for a lot of people to picture classrooms where there's students doing different things, right? I think that most of us picture a classroom where there's a teacher up front, and the teacher is leading the class to all do things at the same time. To think about classrooms differently, to think about classrooms that look closer to the way that most workplaces are, where people are working, they're doing their work at different paces, and sometimes they're working by themselves, sometimes they're working together.
Absolutely, yeah. And I mean, you need to have a physical environment where kids can do work in different configurations. And most classrooms, you can figure out how to have different groupings of kids at different tables or what have you. obviously the use of technology and headphones helps, some kids like really be able to, zone in and shut out the other noise. I would say it would, and then, I'm sorry, let me back up, because you could also then have a particular area in the classroom where a teacher is sitting with a small group of students and working with them on whatever particular set of skills they need to be working on. And if the teacher's not doing that, it's such a phenomenal opportunity to go around and check in with all either the groupings or so many more individual kids. And so I have to say, already in the short part of this school year that I've had, I feel like I've been able to have, especially with the quiet kids and bunch of kids, like I've been able to have those little one-on-one, one-on-two conversations with them that helps me get to know them. When I have 90 students or so, and helps me get to help them learn. And so it is a different kind of classroom. You can still have those whole group lessons and activities, and those are fun,
Yep.
without a doubt. But there's, this other work is, the other way of organizing it, this sort of modern classrooms approach is, it works for more students.
Yeah. One thing that, we're used to the idea of that you have this thing called a floating average, or you have your average that sums all of the work you've done to the date. But it's a lot like counting the practice before the game.
Yeah.
Right? And so
Yeah.
it gives no opportunity for kids to practice. It diminishes kids who worked hard and started at one place and then were able to grow.
Yeah.
Right? Whereas I think we would say that that's the best thing. A kid who has made huge progress during a time, that's the thing that we should acknowledge
Right.
the most.
Absolutely.
And instead we say, no, you started with these low performance and you got to this high performance, so we're going to give you a middle
Right.
assessment.
Right.
Whereas we should say, no, you practiced and you went from lower performance to higher performance. You are to be celebrated.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it's like so many other aspects of learning outside of school. Learning to swim.
Yep.
Learning to ride a bike, learning to walk or whatever. When you learn to swim, you always end up swallowing a little water, or you get water in your eyes and it burns, and you learn something from that in your future swimming. Or if you're riding a bike, you wipe out a couple of times and you get some scrapes, and then you eventually figure out the balance. And it's the ultimate, learning how to ride the bike is what we're aiming for. We're not
Right.
aiming, to grade the practice, and
But that's exactly what
count
we do,
you
right?
down for right. And it doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense at all. And again, with
Because it discourages young people from trying things. It makes them that they are constantly feeling like they're always having to be
perfect.
and tested.
Yeah.
They can't take risks. They can't fail. They can't really practice.
Right.
And it doesn't give them the space to grow.
No, and kids are so afraid of getting it wrong.
Yeah.
So afraid. They're afraid to raise their hands because they don't want to get it wrong. They're afraid to, do homework assignments sometimes, or do any assignment rather, and because they're afraid they're going to get it wrong, there's too much anxiety around learning and too much stress around learning, and then it then gets to this place of just focusing on the grades. And
So imagine that you're want to be a basketball player,
right.
right? And you go out, and every time that you shoot practice baskets, you're like, nope, C,
Right, exactly.
you missed.
Exactly.
Nope,
Yeah.
nope.
Right.
But instead what we should say is, great, you missed 100 times, and now you're starting to get the skills, and now you take it to the game, and now you're
Yeah.
able to perform at a higher level.
Right.
That's what we want to encourage. That's
You
growth.
learn, you practice, you fail, you practice, you get coaching,
Yeah.
and then you keep going. You integrate the missteps, into
But that's just not
the
the way
skills.
that's just not the way that we've got our classroom set up right now.
No, it's unfortunate.
We discourage that type of thinking.
We do. And so I do think it's changing, and it can change. And it's it's important to acknowledge that it's kind of a scary thing. I think I think one of the things about the teaching profession is grading is a place where, as a professional, you have some say, and it becomes a part of your identity, and then to change that is hard. It's really hard. And same thing with kids. I mean, their grades are part of their identity, and their parents, their grades are part of their identity. And so to change that up is unnerving and needs to be done thoughtfully.
As you know, I hired a woman who worked for me at one point who was a 4.0 out of Brown and very, very smart young woman. And I was the first job that she had. And so she would say to me, okay, Greg, tell me what to do.
Yeah,
now tell me how to do it.
Yeah.
Tell me what the first step is, and then the second step, and then the third step.
Right.
She was trained to, I expected her almost to say, is that going to be on the test?
Right.
And it was almost like the academic system had almost defeated the curiosity in her to be able to problem solve, to be able to just go out and to try to go into something and figure it out on her own, and not just figure out the solution, but figure out even what the question is.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I notice it with my 7th graders, without a doubt. They'll say, oh, Miss Lorgan, how's this? How's this? How's this?
Right.
It's a real challenge. We need kids to be able to grow and to mess up and to get some coaching and to continue to grow and to feel okay about that. Like, that's part of learning. That's what we do.
Yeah, I would, as you know, I've said to our kids, and I would say to other kids, that in many ways the key to success in life is try things that are hard, and then when you fail, which you should if you're trying hard things, ask for help.
Yeah. And reflect.
And then reflect.
Yeah.
And if you keep on doing that in your life, then you will develop greater and greater skills and ability to do things.
So I would say that in no way do I think assessment is a bad thing. I think that the way we do grading now is not helping kids learn.
And MCAS is not really helping. I mean, MCAS is a pretty blunt instrument. It's inefficient. It takes too much time to administer. The results come back far too late to help. And so it's not providing diagnostic information to help you as a teacher. It's not as bad as some people say, but it's also not as good as it could be.
Definitely. Yeah, definitely.
I'd like to see MCAS changed where we would have much briefer assessments in the spring that just measure the system, that just give a sense of how's Somerville doing compared to Arlington, compared to Cambridge, controlling for the prior performance of each kid, what's kind of growth. And that wouldn't have stakes for individual students. It would just be a way of looking at calibrating the expectations of the system. And then in the fall, I think we need to embed a series of standards-based assessments, checkpoints, that are mastery-based, so that we start out with a sense of where each kid is, and then we measure where they're able to demonstrate mastery on specific skills in the work we're doing. And so instead of being like you're working here and then you're assessing there, it's that you're producing work. And the work sometimes is succeeding, sometimes it's not, but your best work demonstrates what you're capable of.
Yeah, I feel like, to be able to try to make it better in any way. Certainly the length of the MCAS is too much. It takes over in the spring. And this last spring, during the pandemic, we were able to shorten it significantly.
And the thing that's crazy is it takes over, but it's a 3-hour test, right? I mean, the actual testing time is 2 3-hour tests, right?
So you mean for math and English,
Yeah, for math,
and then for science in some grades.
So how it takes 3 weeks to administer 6 hours of testing.
Well, that's because, right, I mean, that's certainly because of the supports that many kids need. You know, they might need it read to them. They might need a scribe, and so it's a matter of staffing constraints.
But those kids aren't getting those accommodations for their normal assignments.
Yes, they are. Yes, they are. There are, yeah, the accommodations are in the IEPs, and they get those.
But when they go home and they have home assignments, they don't have that type of support.
They don't have that type of support. I mean, and it's there. I mean, one of the things that we have is we do have a lot of adaptive technology now. So even in Google Docs, you can speak into it, and it can read and write. It can write down what you've said. It's text to speech. I'm sorry, speech to text. And so there are some of those adaptive technologies that we can use without a doubt.
Kerri, I just want to thank you for for helping me to understand so much about education. I mean, every day I learn from you, and just it's nice to live our lives together and to learn about these things together and to work on things together.
I feel fortunate to be able to process it with you, to be able to reflect off of, to have you reflect off of things I say and what have you, so it's helpful. Yeah.